Hi, I'm Ira Winkler.
And I'm Araceli Troy Gomez, and welcome to today's edition of the Irari Report, brought to you in partnership with CSO Magazine. Today, we have the very exciting opportunity to talk to one of the most influential leaders in the security industry today.
Howard Schmidt, who goes by many titles, whether it's the Honorable, Professor, whatever it happens to be, has been around the security industry for as long as most people can remember. He was a police officer. He worked for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. He went on to be CSO of Microsoft, eBay, other organizations. And then he also served as an advisor to both President George W. Bush as well as President Obama. And today we're going to be interviewing him on a variety of topics that cover the gamut, primarily as to what most companies can be doing better to protect themselves and where their priorities should be. You've worked for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. You were a police officer. You served as CSO of two of the largest online companies or technology companies in the world, eBay and Microsoft. You went on to be the advisor to both President George W. Bush as well as President Obama. What specifically are you doing now for people?
Well, basically, all these years of experience, one of the things I've learned and has been proven to me over and over that the technologists, the people that are responsible for security, really know what they're doing. But I think there's been a big deficiency when you start getting into the C-suite. The board of directors is considered sort of an IT issue that you have to do with it. The CEO is normally very articulate and very well versed on business risk and financial risk, but not so much in the cyber risk. So what we now with my partner and when I met the Tom Ridge as the Homeland Security Advisor, we basically decided we both have contacts in that realm. We're going to help educate the board of directors and the senior people, the CEO, CFO, and how to do cyber, but how to do it right to improve your business.
So when you do this, what do you advise them are the top concerns? Because there's a lot of hype out there. You know, we hear North Korea, we hear cyber, we hear China, we hear attribution to everybody and their mother. But what are you specifically advising them that they should look at as their top concerns?
Well, it's interesting because what you've said is what I say to people all the time. Don't worry about where it's coming from, whether it's the Mideast or the Midwest or North America or Asia. The bottom line is if your systems are vulnerable, your systems are not functioning in a way that you have the ability to secure it as much as possible, you're at risk. So what I tell them is don't listen to all the hype. You do the things that are important for your company to be more secure, such as strong authentication. Vast majority of the people in every environment use user ID and passwords. I have like 50 some odd myself, and not because I want it that way, it's because other companies don't give us the capability. The other thing is when you use encryption. Every time I've been around somebody that's been intruded upon, one of the first things I say is, what encryption do you use? And the answer is generally, I don't know. We don't use encryption. So those are the sort of things that are more strategic thinking other than firewalls and anti-malware and all this other stuff. You really have to do the basic block and tackling, and they have to be the driving force behind it. The other thing I tell them, this is not an IT issue. So many times I've seen it been, well, I'm going to call the CIO and have the CIO come in the meeting. That's fine. But what about the business guys? What about the physical security people that have to worry about the business impact analysis? It's a whole new world to them without having to speak geek to them all the time.
So, thinking along those lines, when you're talking about both the operational and the strategic, can you talk a little bit about some of the similarities and some of the differences you see between government sector and enterprise sector or public and private sectors in terms of their strategy?
It's interesting. We did a book a few years ago about government cybersecurity, and I wrote the foreword to it. And one of the things I said in there is the only difference between government and private sector is the product that comes out. Government uses the same enterprise, uses the same authentication, uses virtually the same environment since they've gone to COTS back in the early 90s. That's what is it? What is COTS? My mind just went blank. Commercial off-the-shelf software. You can add that, I'm sure. So when they switched over to COTS in the early 90s, it was doing what private sector was doing. So it's pretty much emulated. Even meetings I was in DC the past week, it was all about, well, we do the same thing the private sector does. So as a consequence, the security pieces that we need to do, the environment, the ecosystem, if you would, we have to create is very similar to private sector. But when you look at the end result, law enforcement, intelligence, defense, the product is much different and has much different consequences. The private sector, you go from critical infrastructure that has very, very specific needs to small, medium-sized businesses, to you and I to buy airline tickets or movie tickets online or do what we're doing now and doing a Skype session. The consequences are different, but the processes are pretty much the same.
So, along those same lines, or to follow up on that, given the confluence and the similarities between what goes on commercially or what goes on in the enterprise space and what goes on in the federal and government space, who do you think leads the innovation charge or sets the tenor for the trending? I mean, we've got cyber versus information security. So,
well, it's interesting when you're talking about the difference between private sector and government.
yes, who is the onus on in order to drive the change and drive the innovation?
So it's interesting. Even though the internet was created out of a darker project, clearly private sector is miles and miles ahead. And it's interesting for many years, and particularly when President Clinton signed the presidential decision directive, and we all started chomping on the moving from information security to cybersecurity. We had the national strategy to secure cyberspace in 2003. We had the national strategy for cyberspace international when I was at the White House the most recent time. And the bottom line, it all refers back to private sector being the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the people who come up with the best ideas, and the government will be a customer of them. And I think that's very true to this day.
Well, let me ask you this question, because what basically, adding on Ari's question, the private sector is driving it, but the private sector is woefully insecure, as is the government. And you've already told us that it's like essentially the basic vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. Why do you think that message is not seeping into the public? Because when we look at attacks like Sony, when we look at attacks like the IRS, where it's an authentication problem where better detection might have stopped it, what is the disconnect between why isn't the message of simple vulnerabilities need to be addressed going to government and the private sector, from your opinion, trying to address that through two administrations, two large technology companies, and everything else?
Yeah, and that's the key question is, why can't we get it right? And that's the problem. We're in such a hurry to get to the next piece. You know, we talk about the wake-up calls. I think back into the early 90s in which there were wake-up calls. And the internet, as we know it today, was not around. It was probably about 35,000 of us in there. But every time something happened for a long time, it was, well, that happened to the government. Well, that happened to a large U.S. software company. Oh, this happened to a government. But slowly but surely, I think people are waking up to the call that it could happen to anybody. And it can happen at any time. It could affect your business, it could affect your government, it could affect a whole lot of things going on, which is finally why people are paying attention to it. The problem is they wind up looking places for solutions where the solutions already exist. I'll give you an example. The government is great about creating strategies and private-public partnerships and sharing of information and, you know, urging private sector to develop new technology. But then they don't do anything with it. And we see all the things that have taken place just in the past couple of weeks. Business processes, pretty much irrelevant from a security perspective on the IRS thing. So the bad guys go around, as is reported, they collect all this information from insecure sites, they package it up, and they do a focused intrusion into the IRS based on other information. That makes sense, but it should have been used for business purposes, not for criminal purposes. Same thing with the OPM. You know, the whole thing about phishing and don't click on this and that. You're depending on an end user to make a security decision when their main focus is getting the job done. I want to click this to go on to the next thing. So we know how to rectify those digital identities, digital signatures on email, S-MIME, you know, the whole thing goes down, but it's always, well, it's too difficult, or somebody says it's too expensive. And the bottom line is, it's a lot more expensive to have all your data shipped offshore than it is to put the cost into fixing something firsthand.
So, what you just said kind of strikes a chord with both Ira and myself. Let me see how I can ask this. Do you find that as we start focusing on the advancing threat or the advancement of the threat, we are losing mission clarity when it comes to how to mitigate it? Are we focusing a little bit too much on intelligence-driven solutions rather than operational solutions? Do you have any thoughts on the more sophisticated we make the attacker appear, the less sophisticated our defenses become?
Well, it's interesting, and this goes back years and it still exists today. So back there was some hacking going on that the suspects were being purported to be the most sophisticated hacks we've ever seen anywhere, and that was by the Deputy Secretary of Defense. They were a couple teenagers at Livermore, Stratford. They were in California. And the bottom line is we see this over and over again. Most sophisticated. They talk about advanced persistent threat. Persistent, I totally agree with. Threat, I totally agree with. But advanced, it's hacking 101. You use phishing email to get into a system. You escalate privilege as you need to. You look for vulnerabilities. Then you own the system. Every once in a while, you do get a new piece of malware, a 0-day. But the vast majority of the stuff is stuff that we've known about for 6 months at least that's not being fixed. So the bottom line is there's got to be a real priority put on this stuff that said, oh no, we're not going to patch it in 2 weeks and feel we're accomplishing something because we're not doing it in 3 months. It needs to be done now, and it needs to have a direct impact on what we do from a security perspective. And that's not tough, by the way. And excuse me, Art, that's not tough. I mean, not easy. Because when I've been in the government, I've been in the private sector, and you have $10 million worth of business taking place through the course of a day, and you shut systems down to patch them, there is a cost. But once again, the ultimate cost is going to be, is what are you going to lose by so many different factors?
Yeah, because I would agree. It's like the IRS hack. It was a simple authentication hack that cost $50 million supposedly. And when you're having a $50 million loss because you're not doing data, like checking of IP addresses, that's kind of unacceptable because people are losing track of what the long-term loss is compared to the small thing. And I guess it's really, I mean, you and I have known each other for a long time, and us sitting here agreeing, I guess, is a good thing, but also a bizarre thing for us, I think.
Well, it's like I made a comment yesterday, and you made it as well. When we hear this over and over, it's like the old definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And absolutely, clearly, you're right. Because when you go in and you know a system has no way to do verification of IP address, even the domain name it's coming from. And you expect that, oh, this is a convenience to the customer, this is a convenience to the citizen. In reality, you're really putting them in a bad position. And the other thing, and I hope you would agree with me with this is not something that will wait it out in a year from now, everything goes away. As long as we depend on social security numbers, as long as we depend on a lot of the factors that we use for identification now, it could still arise 10, 15 years down the road, and you're least expecting it.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question. We're talking about basic, simple things that are being exploited. We're talking about the problem being preventable. You work for the government, and the government always require, or the focus always seemed to be on voluntary cooperation. Now that you're out of government, would you say that requiring mandates or having insurance companies requiring things or regulations is a better way to go given all the losses we're experiencing that are frankly completely preventable from everything we're talking about?
So the first thing is I've never crawled out of bed in the morning and say, gee, I wish I had government regulations to tell any of us how to live our lives. Uh, but there are some requirements that I think the government has sort of leadership on. The law enforcement, the intelligence, and all those sort of things. The government has a very good, strong role. But when it comes to private sector, and you look at what can help us, insurance definitely can. Because one of the things you can do with insurance is you have the ability to say, okay, here's where the risk lies. Here's what we're doing to get it, and it helps you pay for your insurance. I know when I was in the private sector before, we got a pretty good chunk discount on our corporate insurance because we had a full-blown operational cybersecurity function in there. So that was one of the things that really helped out. But the bottom line is regulation is not going to help us here. Regulations on how you develop software is not going to do anything as far as innovation, except make the discussion more about what the legal compliance is as opposed to building good software.
So, along those same lines, do you see us inadvertently creating a side industry or a kind of a smoke and mirrors way of practicing security through aggressive risk transference by way of cyber insurance? Do you think that we're kind of creating an alternate industry of, well, we don't need to secure it, we'll just buy insurance to cover it if it goes wrong?
Well, no, and here's what happens. And now I've been working with some of the insurance companies, and Tom Ridge as part of his as an insurance piece of it. And the issue is sure, we'll sell you insurance, but you have to meet this requirement in order to do it. I mean, it's like asking somebody to insure a car when you have 5 kids under the age of 15 driving them. The premium is going to be a lot higher normally, but they're going to say, no, we're not going to insure that environment. The same thing in cyber. It's like the TV commercial we see once in a while. The forgiveness is if something doesn't happen for 6 months, you'll get a check back. Very much a similar incentive to do better, to get better results out of it.
Yeah. So, okay, now if you walk into a company and you talk to the CEO or CSO or whoever else, what's the number one thing you start out by asking them? If you're going to advise them on how to do things properly.
First question is, do you have a strategic plan that addresses cybersecurity throughout the corporation? Not just headquarters, not just the field, but do you have a comprehensive plan? And if they say yes, then we start drilling down on it. Is it relevant? Does it encompass things like disaster recovery in cyber as opposed to just an earthquake, fire, volcano, or whatever it is I used to have to live with? And if the answer to that is no, this is an IT issue that we have them deal with, then there's a problem. And having said that, it's one of the things I emphasize every time I talk about this. The technologists, the security experts, the people that work in the companies, they know what they were doing. If you flip it around and say, you have 30 days to secure it, you're in charge of this company, when I come back, I want to secure it, pretty much most of us would know how to do it. But what impacts us is where you got to compete against other people for budgets. You can't do this because it's inconvenient for the staff or it's inconvenient for customers. In the meantime, you're constantly exposing yourself, and what we see over and over and over is the wake-up call, the wake-up call, and the wake-up call, and all we do is hit the snooze button.
So what you just said is basically that the technologists know what they're doing. If left to their own devices with the proper resources, they would be able to appropriately secure an organization. So my question is, why aren't they getting their message across, and how can they better get their message across, assuming that they're not getting their message across?
Well, the first thing is one of the challenges that we've had with this is we have a tendency to speak geek, as I call it. As a technologist, we love to engage in all kinds of words that we understand, but the management won't. So that's one of the difficulties. I remember a situation one time where I was on travel. One of my senior technologists had to go to a board meeting for me. I got back and they said, never send this person again. It was the smartest person I had in the world. I mean, this guy was absolutely wonderful. But the bottom line is, when you get in a group of executives that are business people, their eyes glass over, they fall asleep and everything else. So one of the things as we grow in our careers, we have to recognize we have to change the way we talk from bits and bytes and mega flops and everything else to this is the impact it's going to be on the business. That's if you indeed have the desire to move into that realm. If that's not the case, it's just you want to stay the super technologist. You want to be the person that can do everything that they need to do from a technology perspective. You have to have a translator, and the translator, and I know this is heresy, has to be someone that understands the technology and understands the business. And we're growing in size, but that's still a difficulty in doing it. So you have to have somebody do that translation to be able to do that. And every CEO and every board I've been to, I get off on a little twinge somewhere and say, oh yeah, by the way, 802.11 AC is AC 32, and they go, what did you just say? And I have to sort of reel back into technologists and talk business stuff. So I think that's one of the things that we're learning now. The CISOs that we see now that have come up through the ranks, like many of us have, they learned that skill. They learned how to talk technology as well as talk business. We have some that basically talk business, and that's somewhat of a deficit for them. I think eventually what we will have is sort of this new business, if you would, where you have the chief risk officer that indeed recognizes all the risk involving the technology, what the business needs are, to speak articulately enough where the senior executives get it, but also they can talk to the technologists.
So those are very interesting points, and I'm kind of a geek whisperer. Like I'll translate between those layers so I understand what you're saying. But I find myself asking the question as we draw a very theatric distinction between terms like cyber and cyber warfare, and then information security being more on the business side or the enterprise side. Do you find that we are fracturing or creating some bipolarity between the ability to speak in business terms about things that are regarded as highly technical concepts like cyber and intelligence? Or is that something that there's still a level of communication skill required to finesse it? Are our business leaders expecting to hear bits and bytes in describing the cyber problem versus risk in the information assurance problem?
Yeah, and I think it's the latter, because what happens is they're never going to hear these things. Maybe 20 years from now, our business schools will start to teach cyber risk, and there's some level of technology. Because right now, what they're teaching is how to use technology, which is call the CIO and call the CIOs and have them do things for you. But what happens is we wind up missing the ball over and over again by having a language does not translate. And that's why people that are successful today have the ability to sort of navigate the political environment, the business environment, but also understand the technology in the background.
Yeah. So again, it seems like we're kind of close to the amount of time we both have. So is there any parting words you might say? Like, so again, our audience is primarily designed to be chief security officers, security executives, and anything. Given, I assume you charge many, many dollars per hour. what is some free advice you would give to the potential audience that, again, that might serve them in doing their job like a multi-million-dollar CEO?
Well, I think the first thing is the whole level of cooperation. You look at all the different associations together, do a great job sharing information. You look at some of the other associations like Safe Code and Tech America and those places, that U.S. Chamber of Commerce, that look at ways to facilitate that without getting sideways with the government. Because we have to really recognize, and all of those that are going to be watching us have to recognize, yeah, we may be broadcasting this from America for that audience, but the same issues exist in Japan and Germany and China and Israel. You have all these different places that basically we're looking to solve the same thing. Forget what the governments are doing with each other. We will never, ever, ever be able to change that. We'll never be able to stop government spying on each other. Get over it. What we have to do is say, in a business environment that's successful for all the people around the world that use the internet, use the technology, we have to sort of come together in that level and say, yes, if I see some malicious activity coming from Southeast Asia somewhere, I'm not going to go running to tell somebody that's going to put it in a big deep hole somewhere. I'm going to talk with the people at the company there, or the people that I know from the security community that can stop those things. That's the biggest chunk of advice to our peers, to those that are in the business. Because if we sit around and wait for governments to solve this problem, number one, we're all going to be retired. The technology is going to change dramatically, and none of this problem is going to do anything but escalate. The other thing is, when you start looking at putting definitions on things, you mentioned a moment ago about cyber terrorism, cyber war, and everything. The bottom line is, if someone is doing something impact to our system, I don't care who it is. I want it to stop. And if we do the basic cybersecurity, cyber hygiene, and I love when Phil Reitinger did a paper on that years ago, here's cyber hygiene, then you can then focus on the really bad actors who would do the things that we've seen recently. Because you'll probably reduce the activity by a good 85%. And from a law enforcement perspective, as you talked about in the beginning, I don't want 1,000 criminals running around. I want 10 really, really good ones that I can use my skills to catch them and put them in jail, and that's what we need to do as well.
Yeah. Hear, hear.
So, in other words, to summarize, basically what you're saying is a lot of our issues would go away with good cyber hygiene if security executives can get the message across that to the C-level suites or the CEO, that good cyber hygiene is going to save people money and is worth the investment in everything else.
Absolutely correct. And one additional thing, and that's don't slow down innovating from a security perspective. Strong authentication, digital rights management, encryption, all those sort of things still need to be, even though we have the technology now, let's enhance it. Let's make it easier to use. Let's make it a position where the end user sitting there in a large corporation doesn't have to decide click or not click, because invariably, if they have to make the decision, the click will occur, and we're having problems then.
Professor, distinguished, honorable, whatever you want to be called, Howard, we really appreciate the time and everything like that, and hopefully somebody will take away the message which both Ari and I have been trying to preach, but somebody with legitimacy. Maybe that'll help us.
Well, thanks so much. Appreciate it. And anytime, anywhere, let me know, and we'll do what we can.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you.
Okay.
Take care. See you later on.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
That concludes this edition of the Irari Report. Again, a sincere thanks to the Honorable Howard Schmidt for his time and attention today, and also to CSO Magazine for their continued partnership as we put this report out.
And we'd also like to thank you for watching it, because without you, this is a complete waste of time. So anyway, please, with that in mind, go ahead, go to irari-report.com. Also try to subscribe to our Twitter channels, YouTube, Facebook, and whatever other social media site we hoard up with the domain name and could grab. So again, thank you so much for showing up. We really appreciate it, and have a lovely time till we see you again. Bye.